This video has been brought to you by the Flash Center. Whether you're looking to rent or buy, their professional service has you covered. Hi, my name is Usman. I'm an architectural photographer at Sonder Creative, and today we're looking at two portrait lenses, the 85mm f1.4 Art from Sigma and the 110 f2 from Fuji. Now the 110 is a medium format lens, so on that bigger sensor with the Fuji GFX, the depth of field and the angle of view that you get is very similar to the 85, and I think that's what makes this quite an interesting comparison. To add to that, I also used the 85mm on the Fuji GFX with an adapter that was sent to me from Techart. Now the Techart adapter allows you to use your full frame EF mount lenses on the Fuji GFX, and you can use really wide aperture lenses on the medium format sensor because a lot of these lenses can cover the full sensor, the smaller medium format sensor anyway, and this makes for some very interesting and unique looking images. For this comparison, we kept things relatively straightforward and simple. I took a bunch of pictures of my friend James using just a one light setup, and I also took a bunch of pictures in more controlled environment for those of you out there who like doing a little bit of pixel peeping. Anyway, I've got these images opened up in Lightroom, so let's have a look at how these lenses compare to one another. Right, so here we have a bunch of images opened up in Lightroom now. We've got Fuji on the left, Canon on the right, and from this distance you can tell that there's a big difference in exposure, and that's because I use high-speed sync on the Canon, but I couldn't get high-speed sync to work on the Fuji. I really did try to get high-speed sync working on the Fuji. I actually bought two triggers, and for one reason or another it just didn't want to work, so I couldn't use high-speed sync on the GFX. However, I did take a couple of shots with the Canon using its internal sync speed, so we can do a relatively more fairer comparison. So from this distance, depth of field is very similar. They both render the background in a, I'd say, similar fashion, both obviously very, very shallow. Zooming in 1:1, you can now start to see the optical performance and the difference between both of these lenses. The 110 is just way, way better than the Sigma. I mean, the Sigma is no slouch. It's known for its incredible performance. However, the 110 is just head and shoulders above it. It's an incredible, incredible lens. The other thing you'll notice is that even the out of focus areas on the Sigma, they're just a little bit mushy. They don't look as pleasing as they do with the Fuji. The way that it kind of goes from in focus to out of focus looks really, really nice, and there's a smooth transition. With the Sigma, I don't know, personally I'm not a fan of how it kind of goes from in focus to going really fuzzy and then out of focus. So not a fan of that, but it's just how these lenses perform. Moving on to the second image on Canon, this was shot with its internal sync speed, so as you can see, the exposures are now very similar. So you can see from the histogram there, they're very, very similar. I'd say that the Canon is a little bit darker than the Fuji is, but that's because the sync speed is a little bit higher on the Canon, but it's not a major difference. Now, I've adjusted the white balance for all of these images, so all of them are at exactly 5500. However, you'll see that there is a difference between the colors. Now, if you watch my last video, I did cover this, but I'm just going to go over it again. The Canon is more accurate. If you look at the road behind James over here, that's not what the road looks like. So you can see over here, the road over here has a more natural tone. This just looks a lot colder. And the Fuji is going for a more colder magenta tone. Even the skin tones over here, the Canon is more accurate. And the way that it renders the colors, you know, it's more vibrant in terms of the reds and the tones. The Fuji just doesn't have that. Even if you look at the eye over here, look at the color in the eye over here versus the color over here. It's just a little bit flatter in tone. The Canon is actually much better when it comes to its color science. Fuji just doesn't have the same ability to render the colors that the Canon does. Right, so let's start looking at some of these images that I took with the 85mm on the Fuji GFX, because this is where things get a little bit fun. So you can see over here on the left, this was taken with the Fuji GFX and the 85mm, and the depth of field is significantly shallower. And the reason for this is because the minimum focus distance remains the same. It's just that I'm able to step in a lot closer and still get a wider angle of view. And what this means is because I'm stepping in closer, I'm going to get less compression in the image, and there's just more of that three-dimensional kind of look. It just looks a little bit more 3D. It has that medium format kind of look to it. Whereas on the 110, because I'm a little bit further away from the subject, it has a little bit more compression, and also the depth of field is not going to be as shallow as the 85. In fact, the depth of field on this is so shallow, it's actually impractical. It's basically, I mean, for a lot of things, it's basically not usable, but I'll show you what happens if you miss focus by like a millimeter. The eyelash is in focus, but the eye isn't. It is, I mean, it's a lot of fun shooting with it, but it's very impractical. Now, in the unlikely instance that you do manage to nail focus, the results are very, very good. I mean, look at how sharp the eye is there, but obviously the depth of field is very, very shallow. I mean, you've only got like a few lashes over here in focus and then the eye in focus. But here's the thing, look at how much sharper this is compared to the 110 now. Now, if you remember before, this was just way better than the 85mm, but now the 85 and the GFX is actually sharper. Look at the skin texture over here versus the skin texture over here. Now, of course, this is because I'm a lot closer to James, so because I'm closer, it's going to be a little bit sharper. The 110 is still optically better. Not trying to suggest that if you put the 85 on the Fuji, you're going to somehow get a sharper lens, because that's not how it works. The sensor on the Fuji GFX is obviously better than 5DSR, the pixels are bigger, so they're just going to look a little bit better, and also because you're able to step in a little bit closer, the image is going to be a little bit sharper compared to the 110. And here is a quick picture that James took of me whilst we were just relaxing after we did our shoot, and once again, the great thing about this combination is that you get a much wider angle of view, but you get the same depth of field as you would, or very similar depth of field as you would on full frame. And this is what makes it very unique and gives it a very, very distinct look to it. And I really, really love the look that you get from it. And again, I mean, it's such a sharp lens. Even at ISO 320, you're getting a tiny, tiny amount of noise relative to ISO 100, but still it's very, very sharp. And for this last test, I took a couple of shots in a more controlled environment, comparing the 110 f2 versus the Zeiss 135 on the Fuji GFX. And if we go in 1:1, you can see that the Zeiss and the 110 f2 are so close in terms of performance. It's amazing how well the 110 performs. It is such an incredible lens. The sharpness and detail are basically identical. Even if I go 2:1, I honestly can't tell them apart. They're just so good. If we start moving towards the edge of the frame, that's when the Zeiss starts showing some of its prowess and some of its capability. And you can see how the Zeiss is noticeably sharper, not by much, but still a little bit noticeable. And if we look at some of the text, this is when we see how the Zeiss is able to keep that detail and keep that sharpness even towards the edge of the frame, but the 110 f2 loses some of the detail. So there we have it. That's how both lenses perform. That's how both lenses compare to one another. The 110 f2 is obviously better than the 85mm. It's just such a good lens. It's incredible. Fuji are really, really knocking it out of the park when it comes to these lenses. They're making some of the best lenses available on the market. Even compared to the Zeiss 135, the 110, I couldn't tell them apart. I mean, they're just so good. Center sharpness, they're basically on point. Towards the edges, yeah, it loses a little bit of sharpness compared to the Zeiss, but then the Zeiss is the manual focus lens. The 110, man. In terms of focusing, the 110 is a little bit slower. I did struggle a little bit trying to get it to nail focus, but then when it comes to medium format cameras, I'd say that the Fuji GFX is the best medium format camera that I've used for autofocus. Not quite as good as full frame, but it's still the best when it comes to medium format that I've used so far. I haven't tried the X1D extensively, so I can't say for certain when it comes to that camera. The thing, however, that I find really interesting is that when you adapt lenses to the GFX, like when you put the 85mm with the Techart adapter on the GFX, you get some beautiful, beautiful results. The shallow depth of field is just stunning. The detail, I mean, you saw how sharp it was, and the depth of field was just so incredibly shallow. And the thing that we can take away from this is the fact that Fuji, or that sensor, can accommodate an 85mm f1.4. Medium format, right now we're not seeing really wide aperture lenses for medium format. And I think that Fuji could be the company that can make those lenses, because if you look at the APS-C lineup, they only make APS-C cameras with APS-C specific lenses. So they've got a 56mm f1.2 and so on. They've got wide aperture lenses there. They should really start looking at making wider aperture lenses for their smaller medium format sensor and just not go into the 100 megapixel territory. The 100 megapixel sensor is going to be too big, the mirrorless camera is going to be a lot bigger, and I think it just defeats the whole purpose behind this very awesome and niche concept. If they start making lenses with f1.4 apertures, man, that would be a game changer. That would be amazing. The Techart adapter itself is just so good. Honestly, I didn't have any problems with it. Just shooting with it, the autofocus just nailed it every single time. It was about as good as the 110 f2. Even in low light, I was able to nail focus. I thought that the adapter was just so good. I've been using it for a couple of weeks now, and so far my impressions of it are so good. I haven't had any problems. When I use the Metabones adapter on my Sony a7R II, the thing that I always used to have is just a few glitches here and there where I'd put it on and it wouldn't recognize the lens, or the aperture wouldn't change. It just little things here and there which are, they weren't major issues, but they would come up. The Techart adapter, however, I haven't had any issues come up so far. I'm going to continue using it, and I am going to be coming out with a more detailed review of the Techart adapter, but for now I just wanted to touch on it and show you what kind of results you get when you start adapting lenses to the GFX. Anyway, just want to say thank you so much for watching my video. If you have any comments or suggestions, leave them below. I will try and get back to you as soon as possible. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Please share this video too. Subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be making another video as well with the Fuji GFX, and I'm going to be using tilt shift lenses to demonstrate how this system could be so effective for architecture. So if you're interested in that, make sure you're subscribed, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Thank you.